So I've taken a little bit of time to digest and really think about the Daryl Dixon show, and now that I've kind of let it sit for a while, I have a lot of different thoughts. I actually found myself pretty upset when Sunday came around and there wasn't a new episode, which is a pretty good indicator for my thoughts on the show as a whole. And while I was editing this, all of my footage got corrupted, so this video would have been out much sooner, but I've had some major setbacks. But you guys have waited long enough and I want to get this video out there, so instead I'll be playing a Walking Dead Custom Zombies map. Looking back at it, this was a great season of television overall and one of the best seasons of The Walking Dead in general. There's of course some sore spots, and I'll go over those, but I'm mostly taking out positives from this season, looking forward to next season, and the general direction that the universe is heading in. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the whole season, but mainly focusing on the final 3 episodes. I've shared my thoughts on the first 3 episodes already, go check out that video if you want to, but I'll share my review and even theories for the second season and beyond. So let's talk Season 1 of Daryl Dixon. The opening of episode 4 feeds further into this storyline of Laurent being this new messiah, and even though it was a dream sequence, I have a lot of different thoughts on this plotline overall and how it was handled. Now, at first I thought this was a really cool bit of speculation and additional lore for the universe, the possibility that this kid is some sort of new religious figure, or at least that people view him in that manner enough to believe in him to change things. Throughout the whole season, there's bits and pieces of evidence strewn throughout. There's the picture he drew, the fact that he cheered this woman up who was apparently inconsolable, and just that everybody knows about him and his presence gives them additional hope. All of these things feel a bit out of place in The Walking Dead's universe, but it seemed like a risk they were taking, and it was going to be one of those things that isn't explained all too well and leave it up for the audience to interpret. I, for one, didn't really think he was this, sixth sense having world-saving messiah, but I thought the idea of it was intriguing, and especially for it to be left for the audience to choose if they believe it or not. Very similar to how all kinds of people view religion in the world as a whole, but then in the final episode, Isabel just comes right out and says that she lied about him drawing the picture, and Laurent isn't actually a messiah. So this makes all the build-up, all the theories, all the questions, and really just the storyline in general feel a little nonsensical. Yeah, he could still be this world-saving leader eventually, and some of the stuff he did in this season still hasn't been thoroughly explained, but I thought that was a pretty strange way to leave people at, to just put a period on all these questions that people had. Yeah, a religious messiah doesn't really have any sort of place in the Walking Dead universe. There's nothing otherworldly or supernatural besides the walkers, I guess, so it doesn't really fit, but I enjoyed the conversations people had and the sides they took when it comes to this plotline. Now that's more or less just gone. But I suppose this also, for the most part, ends the comparisons to The Last of Us, so that's a plus, I guess. Laurent isn't this special kid because of how he was born. He's just like every other kid, but with a lot of pressure and responsibility, I guess. So we'll see how that turns out in the second season and beyond. The last 3 episodes gave us the conclusions to a lot of the side character arcs, and for the most part I think they were all done incredibly well. Isabel and Quinn were some of the most interesting new characters in this universe that we've had for years, especially with the dynamic they share with Laurent and how Daryl plays into that made for some really great scenes. Daryl going in to save Laurent and Quinn trying to stop him was laughable. I thought it would be super unrealistic for Quinn to put up any sort of a fight with Daryl, and he really didn't. Daryl just completely wiped the floor with him, which I thought was in tune for these characters. Isabel's character came full circle, showing us her past was pretty vital to what she had to do to save Laurent by staying with Quinn, and also showed her craftiness and sleight of hand when she needed it to get out of the jail cell. I do think her trying to get Daryl to stay at the end was a little selfish of her, but it's also indicative of where these two characters are heading in the second season, if you know what I mean. I didn't think that the other nun and her love interest were very well developed. I'm calling them that because I don't remember their names, so they clearly weren't that memorable. I feel they were a little half-baked and just thrown in there to add in another human and hopeful element to the series, so I'm hoping in the second season they'll be given a proper and primary storyline. Maybe I'll even remember their names. The bad guy, Cadron, was probably the worst character in the show. He was just a simple bad guy who wanted our main character dead, and his motivation behind that was pretty good, I guess. His reason for teaming up with the other bad guys was also pretty great, but in the finale, he just turns on them out of nowhere and helps Daryl. I didn't understand why he did this. It sounded good on paper and makes for a cool twist and character development, but I couldn't understand the reasoning behind it all. He said he didn't want to kill the kid. Okay, that makes sense, but why let Daryl go if you have such a vendetta against him? And to make matters worse, then he returns to Janae and tries to lie to her, saying that he didn't kill her man. Why even go back there if you don't align with their morals or views? I get he didn't really have anywhere else to go, but at that point just go with the people you just saved instead of going back to the people you just betrayed. His character just became very unclear to me and hard to understand, and not in a good way. But of course, a pretty important aspect of any show is the main character, especially in this show since they literally named it Daryl Dixon. And I've always had a pretty uncommon opinion when it comes to Daryl. I think that like the first 3 or 4 seasons, he was an incredibly interesting character, but once they got to Alexandria and the war with the Saviors came, Daryl was really just kind of a meh character to me. He was always just around. Then I think he got more interesting again when he became the lead of the show, so I was really hoping for a continuation of the later seasons Daryl, which I thought would make sense, but they didn't really do that. What I did not expect them to do was to take the character in a completely different direction, change up a few of his characteristics, and make it all work, but that's exactly what they did. Yes, this is obviously the same character that we've known and loved for years, but he's given time to really flesh out more of his characteristics and personality now that he's not really sharing screen time with any other main characters. Daryl feels the most human that we've ever seen him, if that makes sense. We see some bright and soft spots in his personality, and we also see some angry and honestly downright scary moments. Bringing Daryl to France gets him out of his element, so it brings out all these different feelings that really make for a great way to reinvent a character we've known for over a decade. He says grace at the table filled with kids, even though he's not religious in the slightest, and we also see him interrogate somebody while recounting a story about somebody from his childhood. Daryl is also just incredibly funny in this series. He's always had some moments and quips that make me laugh, but that's really expanded in the series. When he's planning on leaving, he's just going around taking any weapon he wants, saying he's gonna borrow it, and when he's transporting the hostage through the catacombs and he gets injured, Daryl asks him where to go under the promise that he'll help him, and once he gets the answer, Daryl just kind of walks away, no last words or sarcastic remark, he just lets the guy get eaten, and in a dark humor kind of way, I just found this and scenes like this really funny in a nuanced way. The whole character of Daryl is incredibly nuanced and always has been. He cares deeply for those around him and he never really shows that emotion, but when he does, he really shows emotion. The same is true in this show, but he's also given much more to do than usual. We get some very interesting backstories, particularly in the final episode when it comes to the story of Daryl's grandfather and this cycle of child abandonment. It's all incredibly well done and well written, and really makes Daryl feel like a fresh and new character while also seeing the traits and characteristics of the character we know and love. Norman Reedus also steps up to the plate and knocks it out of the park. Like I said, Daryl is a very nuanced character, so the times in the proper show that Norman has had to act, he's proven that he can, but those times are few and far between. In each of the 6 episodes, I was constantly impressed by Norman's ability as an actor. Whether he's playing angry, anxious, confident, scared, whatever emotion it was, it felt like new territory for Daryl and Norman playing Daryl. I think that this season and this show was Norman's best performance playing Daryl that we've ever seen. We were also introduced to a new group of bad guys in the show, and of course some more Walker variants. These were 2 aspects of the show that I truly think are going to be around for a very long time and very important going forward. These bad guys, the guerriers and their leader Genet, clearly have something up their sleeve and a lot of resources to go along with it. From what we've seen so far, it seems like their Walker experiments are being used as a form to try and control the people of France. They want to make France the superior power in the world, but for what purpose? They see Laurent and the people that look at him as a messiah as standing in the way of their plan, but what is their plan? To get Daryl to rescue a princess in a tower? I mean, that's what Farquaad had Shrek do, and these scenes are incredibly similar. I feel like there's a lot of different ways this could go in accordance to the long-term plan of the franchise. Recently, Scott Gimple said that the plan is to converge all of the spin-offs in an endgame type limited series, so these bad guys and the Walker variants seem like they could be setting the stage for a pretty massive shift in the universe. These people could also be connected to the CRM, that's yet to be seen, but I also don't think they are, considering the CRM is looking for a cure, and these people are just trying to make walkers even deadlier. Maybe that could be a plotline for a future season of the show, or maybe it's where the universe is headed in general. These variants that they're doing the experiments on, and the burners, runners, and the ones from season 11 definitely need to be expanded on further, give some connective tissue to all of these threads, or it's not going to make much sense at all. But time will tell how all these puzzle pieces fit together, if they even do at all.
Who came back? Carol. Who came back?
I think the episode that everybody's going to be talking about for quite some time is episode 5, and that's for a very specific reason, but also because this is the episode that really explains how Daryl got to France. That was the big question everybody was asking going into the show, and they really made us wait for the answer, but I thought the answer they did give us was pretty great. It made complete sense how Daryl got over there. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got on a freighter boat that was going to France, but he escaped and jumped overboard in the lifeboat. It wasn't a stupid answer like, oh, Daryl went fishing and fell asleep in the boat and woke up in France. The reason actually makes sense, and there's not really any glaring plot holes with it. The episode itself was structured to show us flashbacks for a few minutes, and then what was going on in present day for another few minutes. This was a pretty great way to tell the story. At first I was thinking how it would have been cool to show us these flashbacks in the beginning of each episode and maybe at the end too, but I feel like the audience would just be watching to figure out how Daryl got to France and not really opening themselves up to experiencing the story being told. And I think that's exactly why episode 5 was structured that way too. Obviously, the big questions are being answered, but by episode 5, you should also probably care about the story happening in the present too, and I did, so this episode was great all around. But during one of these flashbacks, Daryl gets on the radio to talk to Carol. Now, this seems like it should be a pretty happy conversation, right? Well, not so much. Something about Carol just seemed off, and you're not sure what, but this conversation doesn't seem like two friends checking in on each other. Even Daryl is like, "Are you sure you're okay?" And just as the conversation starts actually getting somewhere, Carol's radio cuts out and then comes back in to say, "came back," meaning somebody or something came back. Of course, the conversation on the internet erupted and everybody thought she was talking about Rick. Is it possible it's Rick? I guess so, but I also really doubt it. If Rick came back, that would have been the absolute first thing out of Carol's mouth. Even if she wasn't trying to rush him home or something, it would have definitely been brought up and the conversation probably would have been a lot lighter, but something was off about Carol, and she said something along the lines of, "Things are good, it just takes some getting used to." Is she talking about her job at the Commonwealth? That was my immediate thought, but after rewatching the scene quite a few times, I've got some different guesses. A lot of you guys had really great guesses too, like how it could be Dwight who came back and reunited with everybody. That would align with Carol's kind of off-put behavior because she would know Daryl isn't going to handle this news very well. But what does "take some getting used to" mean in this context? That's why I think a much more likely answer here is Morgan. Morgan left Fear the Walking Dead in search of Rick, so naturally he'd go to Alexandria, and then they'd probably lead him to the Commonwealth. Carol and Morgan have quite the history together and don't really clash all that well, maybe that's what's happening again, and it takes some getting used to for him being around. Morgan coming back wouldn't really be super urgent news for Daryl, but she'd probably still tell him, and maybe that's what she was trying to say. Another popular theory, for some reason, is that she was saying Ezekiel's cancer came back. I think this would be pretty lame. They're teasing this to be some sort of big reveal, and to use this as a way to kick Ezekiel down would be pretty lame. Just let the guy have a happy ending if he's not gonna be in the universe anymore. And the very last reason that I know she wasn't talking about Rick is because at the end of the season, we see Carol going to search for Daryl. If Rick came back, Rick would be right there with Carol going to search for his brother. But he wasn't there, hence Rick didn't come back. Yet. So season 2 we already know is being called Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol, so I guess we just start this whole process over again, right? Question number 1, how is Carol gonna get to France? Is Daryl gonna want to leave when she gets there, or will shit go down in France that will cause Laurent and Isabel to go over to America? As cool as the setting of France is, I feel like there has to be a time limit here. Unless they're gonna move Dead City and this hypothetical endgame series over to France, there has to be some means by which Daryl has to leave. Maybe he does leave and then goes back to France in the future somehow, and he ends up living a happy life with Laurent and Isabel, or maybe that's in America. Maybe one or both of them die and Daryl doesn't get a happy ending. As for my predictions for season 2, Daryl and Carol are certainly gonna reunite. Carol's gonna tell him about whatever got cut out in the radio, and that's gonna make him want to go home. Whatever that information is, or maybe there's more information this time around, and it'll actually be about Rick. Since the ones who live will have already come out by the time Daryl Dixon season 2 comes out, maybe that series ends with Rick getting home and Carol hears about it while she's on the way to France somehow. So Daryl is going to want to leave France after hearing some super important news with Carol, but it's going to be even harder to leave because of his feelings for Isabel. Yes, I think Isabel becomes a full-on love interest for Daryl in the next season, but he's also not going to want to leave Laurent as his pseudo-son, so I think in the end they will all actually leave France together and go to America. I think that Janae and her people will get the upper hand on Daryl and company, and they'll be forced to flee in a sort of bittersweet way for Daryl, but who knows? This could all change at the turn of a page, so those are my way too early predictions for season 2 of Daryl Dixon. What are your predictions for season 2, and what are your thoughts on the first season of Daryl Dixon? If you're looking for a score, then I'd give the first season of Daryl Dixon a solid 8 out of 10. Let me know your score in the comments below, and also let me know if you liked this style of video. Maybe this was a happy accident, or maybe it's terrible. If maybe watching me play zombies was more entertaining than watching different clips and different pictures on screen, let me know that down in the comments below too. And subscribe for more reviews like this. If you do, then I'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.